What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the CBB Yapper. For today's episode, we're going to recap some of the huge games from this loaded weekend of college basketball that just took place. I'm going to give some of the teams that I think are trending up and some of the teams that I think are trending down. And then we'll end it with some games to watch between today's episode and Thursday's episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first game that I had talked about on Thursday's episode was Michigan and Michigan State, which took place on Friday night. This was really not what I was looking for at all. Michigan State kind of just got dominated in this one. Michigan jumped out to an early 18-point lead and just didn't really look back after that. Michigan State did cut into the lead in the second half, but it really just wasn't enough. It didn't really ever seem like it was that competitive of a game. Michigan just immediately answered back and stretched it right back out. On Thursday, I did mention that if Michigan State wanted a chance to win this game, they were going to need a huge night from Fears, and he absolutely delivered. He put in 31 points with 7 assists, 4 steals, and even added in 5 rebounds. I thought he was extremely impressive, but with that being said, I don't know what he was on in that game. I don't know what his problem was, but he just had a bunch of plays where it just looked like he was doing like downright dirty stuff. I know as a Duke fan, I can't really say anything or comment on tripping or anything like that. But yeah, Michigan State just really cannot afford him to be doing that kind of crap. I mean, he's just too good of a player. And without him, they are really just not good enough to compete with these types of teams. He's way too important for him to be getting emotional like that and just making dumb plays like that. They just really cannot afford him to be picking up dumb fouls like that. But for Michigan, I thought it was a really impressive game from Lendenborg and also Elliot Cadeau. Watching Cadeau from last year to this year is just an extremely different type of player. I've said before that I don't think that he can keep this up all season, but he's really made progress as a player as a whole and really trying to prove me wrong here, especially as a shooter. Last year, he shot only around 34%, which was a very big uptick from his freshman year, but he only took 2.3 attempts per game, which is not very high of a clip and not really anything to hang your hat on. But this season, he's shooting 42% from deep on 4.2 attempts. I mean, that uptick in volume is one thing, but the uptick in percentage is awesome. I mean, just for him as a player and as a smaller guard, he really needed to add a 3-point game. And for Michigan, it's really contributing to their success. He had a really good game yesterday, and I think his improvement is really showing here for them. It really just wasn't a good game for Michigan State as a whole. It was a great game for Fears, but other than that, they just really did not show enough to compete in this one or take this one home. But they have a really big opportunity to bounce back here next Saturday against Illinois. That's going to be a really, really good game and a really good matchup for them to show what they have. So, going to be circling that one, of course, on Saturday, but look for Michigan State to kind of bounce back here this weekend. Even a loss against that Illinois team isn't going to be the end of the world, but they could really use another win here. Another game that I had pointed out on Thursday's episode was that Duke and Virginia Tech game. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one just because Duke did exactly what I said they needed to do. They came in and won by double digits. If they didn't, I would have had a little more to comment on this game, but thankfully they went in there and took care of business for me. The one thing that I did want to touch on is Pat Gungba in his recent play. We did mention him very briefly on Thursday and how he played last week, but what he's been providing for Duke offensively recently has been very awesome to see just because in the beginning of the year there were so many questions on where Duke was going to get its other scoring from aside from Cam Boozer, just kind of ignoring that Isaiah Evans was a person. But now they're adding a lot more options on offense, and Gungba has been playing very well recently. Over the past 3 games, he's averaging over 12 points per game on 58.3% from the field, which is just really good, especially, like I said, Duke needing to find more offensive options. He has provided them another option on offense that has been very luxurious, especially around the rim, but even from deep a little bit. He had a couple threes yesterday, and in the beginning of the year, I was not very happy to see him taking threes. But if he's going to hit them like that, I mean, that's just another piece of his game that will just make him that much better of a player. But yeah, if he can continue to add this offensive output for Duke, that is something that they will certainly take. Duke really just dominated this one from start to finish. Even when Virginia Tech looked like they were trying to make things a little close or tried to pull it within a couple points of Duke, Duke just consistently responded and grew the lead back out almost immediately. They also did all of this while dealing with some flu-like illnesses running through the team. Shout out to Dame Sarr and Caleb Foster for what they were able to provide. But yeah, just another good win for Duke. Obviously, not a very good team, so not going to take this one too highly, but something that I needed to see before this upcoming week. They have a home game against Boston College this week before UNC on Saturday. So, going to be circling that one, obviously. Huge rivalry matchup coming up, and Duke will need to continue to take this momentum into that one to pull that one off. Next up, I had SMU and Louisville. Now, I have not been shy on this Louisville team. I have consistently talked very highly of them and have said that they are the second best team in the ACC. So this one had me really worried early on. They got out to an early double-digit deficit to SMU and looked like we were about to see another Cardinal blowout, but they really fought back and ended up pulling it within 3 by halftime. From there on, it was pretty much all Louisville. They really dominated the entire second half. Like I said, I expected Michael Brown to come out and have a much better game than what he did against Duke, and I was certainly not wrong. He definitely looked like the best player on the court again. He was noticeably more comfortable against SMU and their guards compared to the length that Duke had. I really think that Duke's length just really gave him a lot of problems in that game and just contributed to him having such a tough game, so it was cool to see him bounce back here this week. Their schedule really lightens up here, so don't be surprised if they rattle off a couple and end up back in the top 25. This was a huge and much-needed win for Louisville, but for SMU, I do still think that they're a tournament team. They certainly have a lot of talent, and Boopie Miller is one of the most fun players to watch in college basketball right now, but if they want to make the tournament, they're going to have to turn things around really quickly here, and they'll have an opportunity to do that against a really solid NC State team here on Tuesday night. So, going to be looking forward to see how that one plays out. Both of these teams really just need to keep rattling off wins here, but Louisville, I think, is going to end up being in the top 25 here very shortly. They have a really lackluster schedule, so I think they're going to rattle off four wins in a row here most likely, but SMU really needs to turn it around starting on Tuesday night versus NC State if they want to get back in the tournament race. Of course, the game that I think everyone had circled this week but was kind of a letdown was the BYU-Kansas game. This game was supposed to be everything we hoped for, but ended up just being a pretty convincing Kansas win. BYU did battle at the end of the game to try and make it look a little bit tighter, but Kansas ended up just pushing the lead back out again. Peterson was incredible, but only in the short amount of time that he played. He unfortunately dealt with another injury that kept him out of most of the second half. This is just something that just continues to be a problem for the Jayhawks. Obviously, they were able to pull this one off in the second half without him, but yeah, this is just going to be something that Peterson has to figure out, especially even coming up into the NBA draft. He's really got to show that he can stay healthy because people aren't going to want to take a huge risk on someone who can barely make it through a 35-game NCAA season, let alone the 82-game NBA season. So he really has to figure out these injury issues. If he's healthy, I still think that Kansas is one of the best teams in the nation, but if he's not, I just don't think that they have enough to cut down the nets in April. Bryson Tiller really had an awesome second half for Kansas. He really picked up the scoring load for them and pretty much propelled them to a win there. But the one thing that really stood out to me in this game, especially from a BYU standpoint, was how much Dembinsta struggled specifically against the double team. I thought he had a much better second half, but it was really clear that the double teams were just giving him a lot of problems. Being the score-first forward that he is, he really has to add some sort of playmaking ability or some sort of passing ability because on nights like last night, he really needs to find the open man. When he's paired with shooters like Saunders and Wright, if he's getting double teamed, someone has to be open, and he needs to be able to find them for easy buckets and easy looks at the rim. I just really think that that's something that he needs to look at and harp on, but I think he'll continue to grow. He's very young, obviously. He's only a freshman, so He's certainly not capped out at his potential, but that's just something that if I was Kevin Young, I would definitely be pointing that out in the film room. For Kansas, they have another huge game coming up tomorrow that I'll mention later, which is against Texas Tech. That game I will be seated for in its entirety and should be an awesome game. But BYU also has another big test coming up against Houston next Saturday. So both great opportunities for both these teams to add some really huge wins and get a couple games ahead in the Big 12. Next up, I had Kentucky and Arkansas. This was just a really impressive win for Kentucky, especially as I've mentioned on multiple episodes. They're just dealing with a ton of injuries. So to be able to go into Arkansas and beat this good Razorbacks team was very impressive. They needed to win this game a lot more than Arkansas, and it certainly showed. Kentucky just came out and punched them in the face right away and just controlled most of the game. Oweh was really fun to watch and had a great game for Kentucky. He was really fun to watch for other reasons as well. But if they want to watch or want to make a run in March, they will need him to carry them, especially with all the injuries that they're having. Arkansas just really shot poorly as a team from the field. They shot 3 of 14 from 3 as well, which is just absolutely abysmal. Kentucky really just beat them in almost every aspect of the game. They beat them in shooting percentage, turnovers, and rebounds. They just pretty much dominated this game from start to finish. Arkansas really has to bounce back, and they get an opportunity to with two weaker SEC teams here in LSU and Mississippi State. They should win both of those games pretty convincingly, but Kentucky has to carry this momentum into this week as well with another big game coming up against Tennessee. They come into Rupp Arena on Saturday, so that's just going to be another big test for the Wildcats. I still really like both of these teams. I think Kentucky, especially dealing with all their injuries, has been very impressive as of recently, and Arkansas has a backcourt that can compete with anyone. So I think both of these teams are certainly going to make March Madness, but Kentucky still needs to rattle off a couple wins to boost their resume here a little bit. Next up, I had UConn and Creighton. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. This one was just a blowout. I really only circled this game to get another look at Creighton, thinking maybe I was being a little too harsh on them, but they were just unimpressive once again and just got ran out of the building. They just really do not have what it takes to compete with these elite level teams like UConn. They got out rebounded by 13, shot 5 for 21 from deep, and just really struggled all around in the second half there. UConn just continues to prove that they're the best team in the Big East. They're running the table over there, but that's going to be challenged at least a little bit on Friday with St. John's. St. John's has been playing great basketball recently, and it's a team that I've talked heavily on all year, which should set us up for a really good matchup in the Big East. But Creighton, on the other hand, is just not a tournament team. They just do not have what it takes to be competing with these caliber of teams throughout the year. I don't think they're going to be a March Madness team, so again, it's really just UConn, St. John's, and Villanova in the Big East, and then maybe Seton Hall following behind them, but a pretty large lag behind them as well. And with Florida and Bama about to tip here and Illinois, Nebraska taking place later today, I did just want to go over the last game that I was able to watch that I pointed out from Thursday's episode. I'll give a recap on the Florida-Bama game and Illinois-Nebraska game next episode. But that was Gonzaga versus St. Mary's. This one felt a little bit closer than the score looked, but Gonzaga ended up pulling it off by 8. St. Mary's was really impressive and just battled the entire time and even took a 6-point lead in the second half. However, Graham Ike was just dominant and could not be stopped from anywhere on the floor last night. He poured in 30 points, shot 3 of 5 from deep and 5 of 5 from the line, which was just an extremely efficient night for the big man, especially a college big man. That's exactly what you want to see. He was just dominant the entire time and is going to be a problem for teams come March. But St. Mary's really does have a solid squad. I do think that they are a tournament team, and they will most likely make the tournament just due to how weak their schedule is and how many games I think that they're going to end up winning. But I do think that they could possibly win a game in March as well. I just really think that Dent and Shaw seem like two guards that could really be a problem for some teams in March, especially for teams with weaker guards that we've been talking about throughout the year. I really think that they could go in and control those types of games. They like to play slow, so that can tend to be very favorable in the first round, as some teams really like to try and shoot you out of the gym. So I really do like the St. Mary's team. I think that they could definitely win a game in March, but on the other hand, Gonzaga is as good as they always are and pretty much could sleepwalk to March if they wanted to. I wanted to switch things up on today's episode and give you guys some teams that I think are trending upwards here, as well as some teams that I think are on the downward trend right now. Starting with UNC, I think this is a clear team that has been trending up here recently. I have certainly not been shy about my opinions on this team and how poorly I thought they were playing. So I think it's only right that I give them some flowers and a slight apology for their recent play. You won't find many more people that hate UNC more than I do, but they are certainly on the trend upwards here. After their rough trip out west, they've came home and rattled off 3 in a row, 2 in very convincing fashion, and 1 at a very good Virginia team's house. So they have been playing very good ball recently in their past 3 games, and in that stretch, Caleb Wilson has been awesome, shooting almost 66% from the field and averaging 21.3 points per game. He has been absolutely balling lately and showing UNC their recipe for success. So, like I said, this team certainly has the talent to be there late in March and can compete with anyone. They just had really been trending down before this. However, now they're finally getting into the swing of things and setting us up for a really exciting matchup here on Saturday versus Duke. I will certainly be seated for the game in its entirety, and I'm sure many of you guys will be as well. So really looking forward to that one coming up. And yeah, UNC is just clearly a team that's on the trend upwards right now. Another team that I think is on the trend up is a team that I have really been speaking of highly all year, and that's Kansas. We discussed them a little bit earlier, but they are just clearly on the trend up right now. They've been hanging around the 14 to 25 rank all year, and now there's a real chance that they could crack the top 10 tomorrow. For what has been a really up and down season for Kansas, they have been playing great ball recently and rattled off some really huge wins over Iowa State and BYU. They, of course, have to keep this momentum up, and going into Monday night against a Texas Tech team that had a pretty big slip up against UCF on Saturday, so they're going to be very hungry to get this one as well. I think it's just going to really set us up for a very good game on Monday, and look for Kansas and Texas Tech to continue their dominance. They're both very good teams, so either way that goes, I won't be surprised, but yeah, look for both of these teams to continue trending up. And the last team that I have that is trending up here is a team that I just don't understand how it's flying under the radar. They have really not gotten any love from the national media or any attention from anyone, but that is the Texas A&M Aggies. They're 17-4 and currently in sole possession of the lead in the SEC. I get their schedule hasn't been crazy, but they're top 40 in both offensive and defensive efficiency in KenPom, so I do think that they're a legit team. They got 6 guys who average over 10 points per game, which is something that we've talked about with other teams just being a very big luxury. But they shoot the ball great from deep as well as a team, shooting a little over 37% from 3. I really like this team and can't wait to see them this week. I think they have one of the most exciting weeks in college basketball coming up. They're going to be taking on Bama and Florida this week. So 2 top 25 matchups for them and some very big tests for the Aggies. So I'm going to be circling both of these games to see if they can continue their run and continue their dominance of the SEC here. But if they come out and drop both of these games, I will certainly have to walk back my statements on them and say that they definitely didn't deserve the attention that I was giving them. And with teams trending up, there is, of course, teams trending downwards, and I don't really think there's anyone trending downwards more than Purdue right now. Purdue might just want to forget that entire month of January, or at least maybe keep it in the back of their mind to show how quickly things can go south. Purdue went from number 4 in the nation to number 12 and will most likely drop another couple of spots here in this upcoming poll and could potentially be left off completely depending on what happens in College Park here today. This is still a team that I think is very, very good and just really having a couple off games here recently. They have the talent to make it to March. With Braden Smith, the sky is the limit for them. So I really don't think that this stretch is completely telling of their season, but just something to definitely keep an eye on. They just have really had a really bad past 2 weeks of basketball here. I think that they'll be on the other side of this trend here in a couple weeks. I think that they will start to trend up here, but keep the Nebraska matchup circled on your schedules. That's going to be their next big test, and they are really going to need to pull that one off. They have a couple lackluster games in between them that they're really going to need to probably dominate to keep their top 25 ranking, but yeah, that Nebraska game is going to be really telling, and I'm really looking forward to that one here in a week and a half. Another team that I have trending downwards here is a team that I was talking pretty highly of recently and had them just outside of my top 25, but then they really just fell flat on their face here recently. They lost three straight and were routed by both of the SEC teams from Texas. Their scoring has really died down here over their last three games. They are averaging 92.3 points per game on the year, but in their last three, they're only averaging 76.3 and shooting well below 30% as a team from deep. So just a really bad stretch of ball here for the Bulldogs and just really tarnish their own resume. I don't think they're out of the tournament quite yet, but they're certainly getting very close to being out of the tournament. They really have to rattle off a couple wins in SEC play here to get back into the tournament field, but they're really on the edge of potentially getting delegated to the NIT here very shortly. The last team that I have here as trending downwards is this UVA Cavaliers team. This is another team that I spoke highly of a couple weeks ago, but just really floundered here recently. They should hang on to their top 20 ranking, but I almost feel like they don't deserve it. They really blew that UNC game last weekend and then had a great opportunity to bounce back this week against two really bad teams. However, they were taken to the wire by Notre Dame and ended up pulling one off in double overtime. And then they came out and struggled again on Saturday versus Boston College. So just two really bad ACC teams that they had no business being in a game with, but they were. They have another opportunity to bounce back here against another really weak ACC team in Pitt. Pitt has been just playing really badly all year, so I'm really looking to see if Virginia can bounce back here. But however, I definitely want to keep an eye on the Hoos here and see how these next couple weeks transpire for them, because it could get ugly for them real quickly here if they don't figure out some of these problems. Their second half woes have really been a struggle, and they really need to figure out how to close these games out if they want to be considered an elite team. And I, of course, wanted to give you guys some of the games to watch between now and Thursday's episode. Of course, I'm going to talk about the Florida-Bama as well as the Illinois-Nebraska game on Thursday's episode as well, but I'm going to add these games to that list as well for Thursday's episode. Starting on Monday, we have McNeese State versus FS Austin. I wanted to go a little bit different here instead of the typical Power 4 conferences and top 25 matchups, and think this was a perfect opportunity to do so. We're going to go out to the Southland Conference and get a look at both of the teams that have been sitting on top of that conference for the entire year and most likely will be there for the remainder of the year. I just want to get a look at both of these teams, as I haven't really gotten a chance to get my eyes on either of these teams yet this year, but one of these teams will most likely be in March Madness, and I'm really anxious to see what they both have and what their upset potential could be, as they're most likely going to be lower seeds. So wanted to get a good look at each of them and get a feel for how they might match up against some teams in March Madness. Next, of course, we have Kansas versus Texas Tech. I talked about this game a little bit earlier, and it doesn't really necessarily need that much of a preview, but this should be one of the best games of the week. These are two of the teams who I think have the top talent in the nation and are considered top 10 teams in my opinion. It'll be really fun to see Toppin and Peterson go off against each other. They're two of the best players in the nation, but Tech dropped a really tough one, as we mentioned, to UCF yesterday, so I'm sure that they're going to come into this one with their butts lit on fire. However, Kansas is playing as good as anyone right now and certainly needs this win just as badly. So, again, really looking forward to this matchup between Peterson and Toppin. They obviously play different positions, but it should be really fun to see them go back and forth on the offensive end and should set us up for a really high-level game on Monday. Moving to Tuesday night, I, of course, will be watching Duke versus Boston College. Of course, you knew this was coming. I have to watch every single Duke game, so this is not a surprise to anyone, or shouldn't be at least, but Boston College is just a very poor team, and Duke should run them out the building. Duke has been dealing with some illnesses here recently, as I mentioned, to Caleb Foster and Dame Sarr, but even if they are down a starter or two, they should win this game by 10 plus. I really just don't think that this Boston College team has near enough talent to compete with these boys, and Shire has this team playing as good as anyone right now, but don't even consider him for Coach of the Year. he still has yet to cure cancer and solve world hunger. So until then, he unfortunately will not be considered for Coach of the Year, even if he is running through the ACC conference with one total loss on the year. So, yeah, again, don't expect Scheyer to be up for any of the Coach of the Year awards until he cures cancer, walks on water, or solves world hunger. That might start the conversation for him, but until then, don't even mention his name in that conversation. Moving on to Wednesday, I have Seton Hall and Villanova circled. This game's going to tip off at 6:30, so I'm going to watch this one to start and then turn on the Alabama Texas A&M game on another screen. Like I said, I'm going to have to break out the March Madness setup here soon, so not much of a better week to do it than this week. But for this Seton Hall and Villanova game, I'm really anxious to get another look at Nova. I have been watching them a lot recently just because I think they're a very sneaky team, but they have flown under a lot of people's radars. It seems that they haven't even really been receiving votes for the top 25. I believe that they were hanging around the 32 mark as of the last poll. So just not really getting a lot of love from the national media here recently. But I think they have another opportunity to put everybody on notice here against Seton Hall. Seton Hall has been a team that I have not been very high on at all recently, and that has really not changed at all. But they have an opportunity to prove me wrong here. But look for a Caden Lewis and Bryce Lindsey to carry Nova to another win here. I personally think Nova should probably win this one by 10 plus, but Seton Hall is certainly no slouch. They are very good on defense, so I think that they'll at least make it competitive. But yeah, I think Nova will run away with this one pretty convincingly. And as I mentioned, that Alabama-Texas A&M game is going to tip off at 7, so 30 minutes after that Nova game tips off. I'm going to try and put both of these games on separate TVs so I can get at least a look at both of them and, practice my March Madness setup. So not really something to complain about for me at least, but I'm really excited for this game. I mentioned A&M earlier as one of my teams that I think is trending up, and they have a chance to prove it this week and on Wednesday specifically. They get Alabama, who's been playing much better with their recent addition of their professional player that they added to their roster. So, again, I don't want to see Alabama being continued to be rewarded for this move. I will be an Aggie fan on Wednesday night. They're 35th in KenPom for defensive efficiency and will really need a strong defensive night if they want a chance to pull this one off. Later that night, if you can stay up for this one in the nightcap, it is Utah State versus New Mexico. I wanted to get another eye on another mid-major game that has some implications in it, so we're going to go out to the Mountain West Conference to get another eye on two of the top teams out there. Utah State was ranked there for a bit and was a team that I had in my top 25 rankings for a little bit, but then they slipped up in 2 straight games and dropped them pretty far down the list. New Mexico is on a similar trend right now as well. They're both 8-2 in their last 10 games, so whoever wins this one will hold a slight lead for the conference, and this is just going to make it a much-watched game for college basketball sickos all around the nation. But that's all I have for today's episode. I got to run so I can go watch that Florida-Bama game here quickly and then that Illinois-Nebraska game taking place later. But I appreciate anyone and everyone who tuned into this week's episode. If you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and join us back on Sundays and Thursdays for new episodes.